We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Wadawurrung people, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
G'day, it's Chris McKenzie here at WorkSafe with another episode in the HSR podcast, helping you achieve better health and safety outcomes in your workplace. In this series, we're hearing from industry experts and leaders in OH&S, offering advice, guidance and support on a range of topics for health and safety representatives, employers and employees. It's all brought to you by WorkSafe, Victoria's occupational health and safety regulator and workers' compensation insurer. To put it simply, our job is to reduce workplace harm and improve outcomes for injured workers. But we can't be everywhere all at once. That's why the role of health and safety representatives, or HSRs for short, is so important. In the first episode of this series, we spoke to WorkSafe's Executive Director of Health and Safety, Dr. Narelle Beer, about the critical importance of consultation on OH&S issues in your workplace. Make sure to catch up if you missed it. In this podcast, we're joined by WorkSafe's Regional Director of Operations, Chris Walker, to spell out the role of health and safety representatives and the benefits of having them in your workplace. Over his 7 years at WorkSafe, Chris has had multiple interactions with HSRs and has seen the positive impact they can make to workplace safety. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at WorkSafe.
So currently, yes, as you've introduced, I'm the Acting Regional Director of Operations. I've been with WorkSafe for 7 years. For the entire duration of the 7 years, I've been an inspector. In the role of the Regional Director of Operations, I oversee a number of offices around the state where our inspectors are working out of.
I'm assuming that means you would have a lot to do with HSRs. Tell me a little bit about your understanding of the role of an HSR.
Yeah, so we deal with HSRs every day of the week in our role as inspectors. The role of a HSR is a really pivotal role within an organisation that can be a voice for their colleagues around them. The OHS Act gives them provisions of powers that can enforce their employers to mitigate health and safety concerns within the workplace.
Can you tell us a little bit about the differences of what an HSR is as opposed to someone in a workplace who's employed to deal with health and safety issues?
Yeah, sure. Good question. So somebody that's employed by a business in an OHS role does not have powers within the OH&S Act. The OHS person within the organisation is representing the employer, whereas the role of a HSR is a voluntary role that is supporting their work colleagues, being a voice for their work colleagues, and can represent the boots on the ground people with any issues that they might find within the workplace and being that common voice for all with the employer.
So, Chris, could you tell us a little bit about the differences of what an HSR is as opposed to someone in a workplace who's employed to deal with health and safety?
Yeah, sure. Good question. So somebody that's employed in an OHS role is representing the employer. They are the ones writing the policies, procedures, whereas the role of the HSR is a voluntary role that's voted in by their colleagues to represent them in occupational health and safety matters within the workplace. They can be a central voice for employees. And should anybody wish to raise any health and safety issues, that HSR can go to the employer or the OHS person that's employed within the workplace, raise that on behalf of the employees. And the HSR is supported and protected by the Occupational Health and Safety Act.
As an inspector, could you tell me your thoughts and observations about HSRs within the workplaces, specifically those that you've interacted with, I guess, and what you're seeing and how they're helping achieve health and safety outcomes?
Yeah, so they are a really positive role within the workplace. Generally, we see HSR as someone that's passionate about the work that they do and they genuinely want to help the people around them. They are the eyes and ears of the shop floor per se, and they can really assist an employer in identifying something that may be wrong or may just need some tweaking or searching for best practice, and they can be the common voice, pushing these concerns up to the employer and raising them so that things can be mitigated for the future.
They're really that link between the employer and the employees on the ground, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. They are a really good connection point. Some employees may not feel that they have a voice that they can raise to the employer. There may be a bit of fear factor between management and the shop floor, and that role of the HSR is the middle piece of the puzzle that can really speak for others where there may be a stigma around speaking up.
So, Chris, have you got an example of when you've interacted with an HSR or maybe when they've reached out for help?
Yeah, only in the last week I've had a HSR that's really active in their workplace. They reached out that they've been raising an issue within their workplace that they just couldn't get any traction on with the employer. They felt it was getting a little bit long in the tooth and there was delays. That HSR spoke to me about how they could go about issuing a PIN, and I guided them through that.
And Chris, just for those of us unaware, what exactly is a PIN?
Oh, a PIN is a provisional improvement notice. Since then, they've fed back to me that they've issued a PIN on the risk that they identified was there, and that traction has been gained, and that issue is currently being worked on and getting fixed in that workplace. So, perfect example where the HSR has consulted with the employer. They've had those really effective communications that haven't landed where they needed to land, and then they've used their provisions in the Act to support the next process and on going forward and getting those issues resolved.
It's a great example, and I think later in the series too, we're going to hear a little bit more about the powers of HSRs under the Act and exactly what they can do in the workplace. And as you said, you've been at WorkSafe for 7 years, so you've been in a lot of workplaces. You've seen how a lot of workplaces do things well and probably not so well as well. Could you tell us a little bit about the benefits of having an HSR in the workplace that you've seen?
Yeah, so the benefits of having a HSR, we've already spoken about the voice for the boots on the ground people, the shop floor. The other benefits are that they may be preventing the next injury by having that voice or having the regular catch up with their employer, letting the employer know what the employees are seeing, feeling, touching every day, and it may lead to preventing that next injury that could be out there.
Let's talk about legislation and requirements for a moment, Chris. Are HSRs needed in all workplaces? Does an employer have to have one?
Legislatively, no, an employer doesn't need to have a HSR unless the employees within the organisation request to be represented. If they do make a request, then the employer needs to make all reasonable steps within a set period of time, 14 days, to set things in motion to establish designated work groups.
And we will focus on establishing those designated work groups in the next episode of the podcast. What about requirements for HSRs to be trained?
Yeah, so it's legislated within the OHS Act that if we do have an employee duly elected into the role of the HSR, there is provisions of the Act for a 5-day initial training course for an elected HSR. And then yearly, there's provisions in there as well for refresher training, a single day.
So, Chris, if people are out there wondering about health and safety in the workplace, they're thinking about maybe becoming an HSR, are a bit unsure of the whole process, what advice would you give them?
I would say jump in. I would say reach out to WorkSafe on our advisory line, or we've got HSR Support Officers that people can reach out to, get some advice. But have a chat to your employer. I would recommend it that all employers consider putting it down to their employees as well. The employer can initiate those conversations as well. It doesn't have to be the employees.
Thanks so much for joining us, Chris. So just to recap some of the main points there, employees in all Victorian workplaces are entitled and should be encouraged to be represented in relation to health and safety issues. Employers and employees should exchange information and ideas about risks to health and safety and measures that can be taken to eliminate or reduce those risks. WorkSafe encourages the establishment of designated work groups, or DWGs, and the election of HSRs in the workplace. An HSR is an elected and voluntary role and is not a requirement in a workplace, but they can make a real difference in achieving better health and safety outcomes. Employers must work with them and support them in this role. For further information on today's topic, check out the links in the text below. This has been another episode of the HSR podcast brought to you by WorkSafe, helping achieve better health and safety outcomes in your workplace. Next time, we'll be joined by 2 inspectors from WorkSafe's representation support team to discuss establishing designated work groups. Until then, if you have any OH&S issues or concerns or to lodge a case, you can contact WorkSafe's advisory service on 1800 136 089. You can also head to the WorkSafe website to subscribe to our monthly newsletter for HSRs. And if you are an HSR in Victoria, WorkSafe has a dedicated support team available whenever you need help. Just email hsro@worksafe.vic.gov.au.
Please note, this information is based on laws applying in Victoria only. It is correct at the time of recording, but is not to be relied upon as legal advice. This episode does not outline all the legal obligations under Victoria's occupational health and safety laws.